Teresa's the one. No, he said that side job. You're probably right. No, you're probably right. I was probably that. I don't care what you say. Still should mention it. But I had no problem. Everything happens with the board. We do better. So I was fine with that. Maybe. In their minutes, it says they're going to meet with the directors. Is that a month? I have no idea. Someone's told me that. I have no idea. That's a Wednesday. What is it, a Wednesday? 3 days before the election? Yeah, 30. Yeah. Oh, that's a big ass. Yeah. Hey, Chair. Yes. Is there a comprehensive plan that folks? I don't know. You don't know? I can check for you. It's all right. No,
Gentlemen, I'm ready to start anytime you are.
Yep.
Let me take a quick second to introduce ourselves. My name is Pete Miller with Miller Dodson Associates. I'm with Bill Scriven, one of our associates, who has been with us for
10 years.
10 years. What I want to emphasize today in this presentation, what I want us to come away with, is that our goal is to help you meet your goal. We're not just here to sell you a reserve study. We're here to help you attain what we call financial sustainability. And I'll cover that a little bit more in a second. What we're able to provide in terms of our reserve study is not only the expert analysis and investigation, looking at the costs, the life expectancy, that sort of thing, but also a report that's going to give you all the knowledge-based tools to make meaningful decisions. And we provide unmatched support of the board in terms of follow-up, in terms of presentations, in terms of just doing what-if scenarios. When I talk about a financially sustainable community, what I'm talking about is one where the normal assessments are competitive. They are searching for the word. They are increasing each year at a predictable rate, but not increasing at a precipitous rate. We want to make sure that the reserve study in the end reflects what you all are hoping to do as a community, not just what some outside contractor, outside architect or reserve study is telling you have to do. And also, we want to make sure that as part of this, that we meet the goals of the board in terms of the property values being protected, enhanced, so that the people that are living in the community can maintain their property values. Financially sustainable community, we're really looking at three things. First is cost for the operations of the association. The second is the cost of maintaining all of the things that are owned in common in the association. And the third is the reserve studies. And that's what we concentrate on, the reserve study portion, because that's something that you all as a board of directors or as committees have a hard time dealing with. So what we want to do is to make sure that we have the assessment income that is going to allow us to attain the goals of the community in terms of the hopes and expectations, and therefore protect the property. That's what we have in the balance. When we talk about the reserves being low or the reserves being inadequate, what happens is if we don't have adequate reserves, it means that at some point in the future, there's going to have to be an increase in assessment. That increase in assessments means that for some people it's going to be a financial hardship. Financial hardships many times result in delinquencies, if not foreclosures. And with delinquencies, we have less annual revenue to operate the community, and that leads to higher assessments in the future. So it's just a cycle that, with proper planning, we can avoid. Let me just illustrate the point, and this is one that we've talked about a lot across the country. Mrs. Jones, one of your neighbors. She's lived in the community for 20 years. She's a retired teacher on a fixed income. You've had her over to your house for dinner. She's babysat you. And now, as a member of the board of directors, you're foreclosing on her home. Now, how does something like this happen? Because we do see it a lot. I mean, it's one of the toughest things that a board has to do. One of the toughest actions they have to take. Typically, it's a lack of planning. And a lack of planning could mean a lack of education on the part of the board. They just didn't know how much they were supposed to reserve. We work with some boards that get our report and just stick it in the filing cabinet and never deal with it at all. We have other boards that have had plenty of reserves at one time, but they've spent it down for things other than what reserves were set. All of that indicates lack of planning. Now, you might say, well, as a community, as a whole, we have to accept the fact that sometimes people just can't afford to live in our costs have gone up, whatever else. The board typically, if they see an unbudgeted item that appears or something that is accelerating deterioration, has to choose between special assessment, increasing normal assessments, taking out a bank loan. When those things happen, the Mrs. Joneses in our community get caught in the middle. But what happens to property values when Mrs. Jones, who gets the letter of intent to foreclose, puts her unit on the market and accepts the first lowball offer that comes along? It's not only affected Mrs. Jones, it's affected everybody in the community because it's affected everybody's property values. So our process doesn't just include the reserve study. When we're dealing with the reserve studies, many times we take the next step for the communities that need it and help develop a strategic funding. How do we get from where we are to where the reserve study tells us we have to be? And frankly, that's the shortcoming of most reserve studies is hand to this reserve study and say, congratulations, you're in horrible shape. Call us in 3 to 5 years when you want an update. So what we do after the reserve study for the communities that need it is to provide a strategic funding and then provide the support to the board in whatever form they need, whether it's us attending the annual meeting and providing a presentation to the membership, whether it's doing what-if scenarios on a number of items that the board may want to jockey around in terms of timing, in terms of the priority. So the reserve study, we evaluate the current conditions. We also examine current practices. A lot of boards will have a policy that says if something costs more than X, it lasts more than 3 years, we're going to treat that as a reserve study item. If it costs less than X, it has less than a 3-year life expectancy, we're going to treat that as a maintenance and operations item. It's all left pocket, right pocket. We're going to pay for it one way or the other, but we need to make sure that it's proper. We explore the community goals and plans and aspirations with you all. You all are the ones that set the priority. You all know what the community is sensitive to. You all know where that 5-year plan or 10-year plan or whatever plan the committee spent months putting together, where that's located. So that could be in the reserve study. And lastly, with the reserve study, we provide funding recommendations. And when I say recommendations, I mean it is simply a recommendation. But it's not always something that's cast in stone. We may want to look at that recommendation and say, hey, we can't have that much money. Let's do this over a several-year period. So we come up with a strategic funding plan. How do we get from where we are to where we need? So we explore the funding options, which are basically 3. Increase normal assessments, have a special assessment, or use a commercial bank loan. or a combination of two or more of those items. So then we come up with the strategic funding plan. The support and education, in many cases, is just as important as the recommendations, because the board then has to go back and explain this to the membership. And that's where we can come in, offer meetings, offer educational seminars, both to the boards and committees and to the membership. And then, of course, it's periodic revisions, as you all have done over the years. Tool knowledge, we mean that we provide you with the graphical information, and I say information, not data, so that you can make informed decisions. And we take the approach that, as a board of directors, you all are looking at all aspects of it, whether it's having a collection policy, maintaining your physical assets for as long as possible in order to maximize the reserve study, the reserve planning, and then plan for eventual replacement. We want to have assets in the community that look like this, where it's well planned, well maintained, plenty of money for eventual replacements, or assets like this. What we don't want is to end up with assets like this. And far too many times we find that the community just hasn't planned enough so that they can maintain those amenities that we need. We make a distinction between data and information. Data is numbers. Data is items in an inventory, but it doesn't necessarily convey the information that we need to lean out as part of this reserve study that we're paying for. So when we look at a typical reserve study, and I sat on the Reserve Study Standards Committee for years, and we see that we've got all these items that are part of the inventory of physical assets that the community owns. And based on analyzing those, a typical report comes up with this. Now, to me, and I've reviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of reserve studies over the years, that doesn't convey any information. I don't know what that says. When we look at a Miller-Dodson reserve study, here's the way we present it. We have the same typical breakdown of items and components that gives the unit measurement, the unit cost, the normal economic life, the remaining economic life. And in order for that to be usable information, we publish it as a calendar. And the calendar says, here are the things that we feel is to be prudent to have the funding available, not here are the things that we have to do each year. But here's when we feel it's to be prudent to have the funding for that item to be replaced. And you'll see in the bottom of each of these years that there is a projected total. Some years we have a lot of reserve expenditures. Some years we have hardly any at all. But if we look at these totals in terms of a bar graph, here's what we find. And this bar graph says that on the average we're projected to spend $140,000 a year. Well, that's a little bit more information. The really informative graph is this. The orange item is how those expenditures accumulate over a 30-year period. The blue line with the triangles is how much this association is currently putting into their reserve fund. And we can see quite clearly that about 10 years out, they run out of money big time. The upper graph, or the upper line with the red circles, is the cash flow method calculation for reserves. And all that's saying is that we always want to maintain a little bit of a minimum balance. We never want to do a zero-based cash flow. So based on whatever our starting balance is, how much money do we have to put in each year to fund those future items? And it gives us some other information. In those first 10 or 15 years, it shows based on cash flow that we're actually going to be building up a considerable amount of reserves in the account. That's great, because when somebody reads the annual report and it says we've got $3 million in our reserve fund, the question is going to be, why are we still putting money in the reserve fund? And with this graph, we can say, because we have all of these future financial obligations. It also tells us that where we are now with the blue line, which for this particular association is $90,000 a year, the cash flow method was almost $150,000. And we can see in those early years that the underfunding is going to be a little bit easier to make up. It's going to be a lot harder each year that this goes out, and that space between the cash flow and the actual funding level gets broader and broader. So we've just been handed a reserve study that says we need to increase our reserves by $60,000. It's a huge increase. And this community in particular could not afford to do that. So what do? They reviewed the inventory. Let's look at the priorities that we set on all these components. Let's rethink the replacement of some of these items, whether they actually have to be replaced. Could it be a major repair? Examine the funding options. Increase normal assessments, have a special assessment, or use a commercial bank loan. So this is what we use to develop the strategic funding plan. And looking at the cash flow, they were well funded right up until about year 16, 17 of the study. Again, looking at this graph, we can see that in those early years, even at the $90,000 that they're projecting, they're going to clear the first expenditure. So we use this time, the first 5 years, to develop a plan where we increase incrementally. And in this case, we simply, instead of having a $60,000 one-time increase, we increase by $12,000 a year over a 5-year period. And that fifth year would bring the additional reserve study update. And at that point, we could look to see if there was anything else that needed to be done. That's the presentation that Bill and I wanted to share with you today. As we go away from this, what I want to emphasize is that when you're working with Miller Dodson Associates, not only do we provide you the information that's needed to make informed decisions, but we also provide that support. So as you're going forward, whether it's working with committees to come up with the priorities in the reserve study, whether it's coming back and doing presentations to the board of directors, or live presentation to the board of directors and committees, or attending the annual meeting and explaining what the reserve study is, where the numbers came from, what the recommendations are. That's the type of support that we want to provide. It's the type of support that we think as a community that you all deserve. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you all have.
Can you tell us a little bit about the staffing at your firm? I mean, how many engineers do you have? Do you outsource a lot of this? Is it inside? What do you do? How do you calculate placement costs and stuff like that? Is it an RS means thing? Is it, how exactly are you structured and set up?
Well, let's start with the structure of the firm. And we have a rather unique business model. I know some of our competitors try to knock us for it. We have 5 full-time employees. Bill and myself, Jim Dodson, a marketing assistant, and our office manager. We have about 17 or 18 architects and engineers in different parts of the country that do the reserve study with us. They're not full-time employees. Most of them are retired or semi-retired architects and engineers, many of them from the military, so the Navy Engineering Corps, the Navy Corps of Engineers. They do the field work, they put together the report, they assemble everything, it comes back to our office, we review it, and then send it off to you. What's the benefits to you all of that business arrangement? One is that the architects and engineers that we use are very, very mature, very experienced, have the breadth of experience that they can deal with different situations that might come up in the community. In terms of the pricing, what we typically will do is ask you, who are the paving contractors that have done successful work in the community? Who are the roofing contractors? Put us in touch with the swimming pool maintenance people. So that information's out there. We just have to help you glean it so that we can have good information to go into the reserve study. Very few things that we would use the RS means report for, because frankly, the RS means reports are outdated by the time it's on the shelves. And some of these costs are so volatile, not only by region, but by zip. Asphalt is going to cost more if they have to haul the wall away. It's going to cost more if they can't recycle the asphalt that's down because last billing and an overlay included putting some geofabric in the mix. So we try to go with local contractors, local sources, and you all as the board of directors or as the facilities manager are going to have people that we can contact to get.
Okay, so basically what you do is you kind of try to, now who does that? That's the engineer or architect you assign to the job then basically works with us to try to get local people that would then give you what it's costing a square foot to do this or cubic yard?
I'm sure you have names in the file. Who are the couple of contractors that we've bid to? Who's been the most successful, the most reasonable, who's done the best job? So yeah, we would call them and say, what is your cost per square yard in place in this community? Or what's your cost per square roof in this community?
At the end report, what is describe to me the deliverable to us and its ongoing usage?
The deliverable is a reserve study that has not only the numbers and the projections that we have, it has a narrative that describes the conditions of all the major elements that we looked at, so we know what condition those assumptions of remaining useful life are based on. It's issued as both a hard copy and as a PDF, so that it can be distributed.
Right.
Typically, the process is we'll come out, we'll look at everything, we'll meet with key individuals to try to come up with names or talk about the history of certain items so that we get a better idea of what the deterioration rate is. We send you the initial report, and at that point in time, you all go over the data. You all look at those numbers and make sure that what we're projecting makes sense in terms of the timing, whether we've included everything that needs to be included or whether we've included some things that may not be your responsibility. A lot of times it's the local jurisdiction or the individual homeowners or whatever. So you all go through that either in a meeting with us or you all get a committee together and go over that. We want to hone the accuracy of the data so that we have more accurate information. So once we get those comments and questions back from you all, we make the appropriate revisions and issue the final report. Now, many times what we find is reserve study is going to ask as many questions as it answers. And so the back and forth during that period sometimes can be very, very extensive. Also, we find that doing the what-if scenarios, doing the different revisions so that we can say, what if we move this up, what if we move that back, how is that going to affect the study? That's very important. And so that give and take is a very interactive process. I'll give you an example. A place that we did the reserve study for just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, called Magnolias. Beautiful, brick townhomes, but the brick townhomes were in the 4,000 to 5,000 square foot range. Beautiful landscaping. Inside their gate was this rotary roadway that had cul-de-sacs going in and out, and about a 50-yard, 5-lane wide approach to their gatehouse. This was in very bad condition because every lost truck driver on the outskirts of Charlotte used that to turn around and go back in the other direction. So it destroyed the paving, it destroyed the Belgian block curbing. When we did the reserve study, we said, look, if you patch and seal coat and crack seal this, you can perhaps make it last long enough so that it can be done as part of the overall paving project. And the response that we got back was, yeah, but we feel very strongly, since that's the first thing people see when they come into our community, that we want to go ahead and replace all of that now. So let's move that up in the priority list. We'll do the rest of it when the time is appropriate. So it's that kind of input that many times you all can give us that we wouldn't automatically know from being out on the site, talking to board members or committee members or staff.
Let me ask you a question, though. When we get all said and done with all of that, we get a PDF report from you and a hard copy. Okay. And that's good. That's the snapshot right then with our input, your stuff, and it's all put together. But going forward from there, do we get something that we can export to an Excel spreadsheet? Do we get things that we can play with? Because that, as you just talked about, when we talked about construction costs and RS means, your report's out of date the day after we get it, okay? Because things are changing. And the question I have is, we've got plenty of reserve plans floating around Ocean Pines, okay? And they're all sitting on the shelf across the street. Well, what I want to know is what do we have that we can use as a planning document and a living document going forward? Do you provide that, or do you provide something we can,
We actually provide all of the data in an Excel spreadsheet. So you can then import that into whatever management software you're using. What we don't provide is the software to make changes to the analysis. And the reason is this. We've tried this in the past. And frankly, places like Kiawah Island or Celebration, Florida, which were big communities, had a lot of staff, after 6 months came back to us and said, every time we change something, it messes up priorities for everything else. We'd much rather just redline this, fax it to you, have you make the revision, and send it. And it's a much more successful process, and it's less work on you. So if you want to look at, let's only do these roads, let's move the other, let's move those roads out 3 years, mark it up, send it to us. It takes 5 minutes to run it and send it back.
And how's that handled from a billing standpoint? Is that something where you're on retainer with us? Is it something that for 6 months and you either pay up front, for those revisions, those updates?
Unless we're going through and doing a major change to all the data.
Right.
We don't bill. We consider that to be good client service, customer service. Very few times that we've ever billed for changes. But let me tell you what would trigger that. And there's been one or two that we have billed. When a board of directors comes back to us once and says, we want to change all these, they come back 2 weeks later and say, we also want to change all these. And then after about 4 or 5 times doing that, we realize the problem is that the board of directors can't decide amongst themselves. And you might get a response back from us saying, yes, we will make this last change. But after that, drop the top. And let me give you an example. Wexford Plantation, down on the main drag in Hilton Head. Beautiful community, $1 million homes. They not only have a yacht club and golf club, they have their own marina that's controlled by a lock system because they don't want those $1 million yachts going up and down on the bulkhead. We did 27 iterations of their reserve study. I think we started charging for it at about 25. Now, they were actively pursuing the right answer for everybody. And the dichotomy in this community was half the community said, if we raise our assessments at all, we no longer will be competitive with the next community down the road. The other half of the community said, yes, but our golf course is 30 years old. We've never made any upgrades. We need $3.7 million to make the changes to the golf course because if we don't have a good golf course, we're not competitive with the next community down the road. So everybody's goal was, let's do what we can to protect and enhance property. But they had 2 different ways to do it. I think at about the 26th iteration, it became clear that we were getting close because both sides were pissed off equally. But they finally came to a compromise. And I mean, it was small stuff, like if we take out a loan at $3.7 million, what if we're paying 4% or 4.25% or 5%? Or what happens if we up the property transfer fee when a house gets sold to 0.75% instead of 0.49%? So it was small stuff. But they were actively looking at what is going to be the best predictor, best projection for what's going to happen. Now, you were right about the prices being out of date the day that you report. One of the things that we do is we provide you with 4 years of inflation in a separate page calculation. It doesn't help the accuracy of the report to say we're getting this much interest and this is the inflation and we spread it out over a 30-year period. It's just smoke and mirrors. But we can say, let's look at 4.5% inflation in the construction industry for the next 4 years, and that will show us how these annual projections should increase in each of those years.
What index are you using for that inflation?
The producer price index.
CPI.
No, PPI.
PPI.
Used to be CPI. The consumer price index used to be the cost of living index.
Right.
Right now, the Bureau of Labor Standards gauges on the CPI food costs, fuel costs, electricity costs, and rent. But when we go to the producer price index, we're looking at construction or manufacturing output, and we can bore down and look at the manufacturing output for specific items. We can see that over the last 3 years, the cost of asphalt has come down incrementally. because the cost of a barrel of oil has come down. It hasn't come down the way that gas prices have. And so we're still looking for any petroleum-related product, whether it's asphalt paving, paint, vinyl siding, asphalt roof shingles, plastic piping, vinyl for the windows. All of those things are increasing from the manufacturer at a rate close to 10%. And certain metals, like copper, are increasing dramatically each year. But we don't see that 10% on site in place, because when the manufacturer ships it out, the distributor takes a little bit of that hit, the builder takes a little bit of that hit. We're seeing a little less than 5% per year on the average for these items.
I'd like to chime in just a little bit
Yeah, please.
on the update issue. We do have a particular client in Florida, Blue Tree Resort, and they come back to us every year for a level 3 update. And what that is usually charge them a fixed fee to be able to go through and bring all of the numbers and data up to our current prices and also then reduce the remaining economic life on those items so that they're really kind of getting a paper shift of that analysis that brings them up to the current pricing. So there's a couple ways to handle the whole update issue. In interim of a on-site inspection.
Our goal, like I said, is to help you attain your goal, and we want to provide the best customer service that we can. If we thought that giving you the software and letting you make the changes would be a successful way of doing that, we'd do it. But the times we've tried it in the past, it isn't. Everybody's realized that, hey, we can just redline this, send it off to them. Later that day, we get the changes back. I've got some competitors that refer to that as being interactive. It's an interactive reserve study. Well, it's good client-customer relations as far as we're concerned. If you have changes you want to have made, give us a call or scan a red line page and send it back. Our response time is pretty quick. Sir?
We have, as an association, at least 2 major facilities that are about, I'll say round number, 45 years old. Various levels of maintenance have been performed that 35 years. And you're going to, I assume, look at those facilities and components of those facilities and tell us what their lifetime is and what their estimated replacement is. How will that report help vision whether or not we need to do a major renovation on that facility or we need to replace that facility?
The answer is this. If we want to do a couple of what-if scenarios, you've got a 45-year-old facility, is it going to be better to maintain it, to replace the roof, to redo the mechanical system, do all that? Here's what it's going to cost over the next 10 years, whatever time. Oh, we do a what-if scenario. What if we tear this place down and build something new, and all of those things have a full 30, 40, 50-year life expectancy? How is that going to affect the research? Or we look at, if we tear this thing down and rebuild it, we've got a certain amount of money in reserves that we can put up as collateral. We go out and get a commercial bank loan. There are just half a dozen banks that we work with that specialize in giving those types of loans to community associations. And then look at what the payback period over the 10, 15, 20-year term loan, so that we can see where those totals end up and how that affects how much the annual assessment. It's a simple way to scenario.
Is that
we did it? If
part of your service?
Is
that part of the standard service?
Yes, it is. If any of you are familiar with Gibson Island Club up in Maryland, up on Chesapeake Bay, their clubhouse is very nice history. Beautiful interiors, great views of the Chesapeake Bay, and it sits at about 2 feet above mean high tide. So it floods 3, 4, 5 times a year, and they're replacing carpet, and they're replacing drywall, and on top of that, the mechanical system was 40 years old. The entire building was probably close to 80 years. And our recommendation to them was, yeah, we can replace all these things, but by the time you replace them, it would have been cheaper to just tear it down. It's a pretty easy what-if scenario to do.
Would that be part of the strategic plan that you talked about? Is that
Either part of the strategic plan, well, it would have to come before the strategic plan, because if you plan those expenditures, they were part of this, part of the final reserve study, then we sit down and we look to say, okay, how is this going to be funded over the next 5 years? So it's part of the process. Where it fits in terms of the strategic funding, I think it probably comes. But it's not a clear delineation. We may do a couple of what-if scenarios and a new strategic funding plan.
so based on your survey and your interaction with us, we'd come to a mutual conclusion, consider something?
Again, reserve studies raise a lot of questions. It may be that there's a 60-day process from the time we get a signed contract, giving you the initial study. And it may end up being a 9-month contract, 9-month time period, as you're going through all these different scenarios before you get the final report. Or you may get the final report and adopt that for this year's budget, and then next year have a committee start looking at what if this building isn't replaced. In some communities that we've done, they have 4 or 5 top, and the youngest kid in the community just drove his father's Volkswagen to high school. Why are you replacing 4 or 5 tops? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit with the needs of the community. So that's the type of adjustments that we look at when we explore what the current practice is. Do you treat this as maintenance and operation? It would be better taking it out of that fund that's adjusted each year and institutionalize it as a reserve study.
Not giving details. The Sea Pines Property Association is the one closest the size that we are.
Right.
Is this what you just described to us as what you did for them as well?
Yes.
But,
we provide whatever level of service you desire. There are some communities, and Sea Pines may be one of them, where they get the report, they're happy with it, they never ask for anything else, and we get a request for a level 2 up. There are some communities, like I said earlier, that take a look at it and go, doesn't make sense, we can't do that, and they stick it in the door and never ask a question.
Well, when you look at the strategic plan in the aggregate for a facility, our country club, and you're talking about a 45-year-old building, the condition of the components is one factor, and their lifetime is one factor. But there's also the factor, and you look at that if you're going to replace these, or if you do have to do a significant amount of component replacement, you can reach a point where ADA requirements have to be met as well, which is a huge jump in cost.
Well, not only that, but there's also the aspect of actual usage and operation. Is that facility serving its purpose? One of the communities that we're working with just outside of Cincinnati, they have a committee that's called their 2020 Vision. Very clever play on words. They started it last year. And that committee is determining through surveys and whatever else what their community is going to look like in the year 2020. And one of the first things they did is they looked at their clubhouse, which was fine when everybody was busy families and everybody's going to work every day. But now that they have a lot of people who are retirees and they look at that usage, well, the pool's definitely outdated. Clubhouse isn't big enough to have anything other than an annual meeting. They'd like to have a facility that they could rent out for weddings, that they could have big Christmas parties or whatever else. They had no aerobics facilities. So they got into exactly that situation. Does it make sense to be replacing the components of this? Or because of the change in usage, should we add on to that facility, tear down the facility, and start from scratch?
Well, what you have to do to answer that question, I suggest, you have to know what the replacement cost of the components are. And you would have to know what the replacement cost of the facility is, just to be 4%.
Well, here's one place where RS means may come into usage, and that is you can look at the square footage cost of typical facilities. So whether it's a country club or it's an office building or it's a apartment building, they give you those projected square foot costs. Those square foot costs may be fine to go into the reserve study, and at that point you decide you may want to get some rough plans together by an architect, put it out for rebid. That way you start honing the degree of accuracy on the data that's being plugged in, which means we're getting more useful, more accurate information.
Yeah, and I'm just asking if you will fit in that process, or is that on us? I guess saying it's on us.
Well, we wouldn't estimate for you how much it's going to cost to replace the entire building.
Would not, you say?
We would. There are people that there are contractors who do that for a living that have a much better idea of what this costs are. We could research what the average cost is for that type of facility. But you're asking for a reserve study. You're not asking for an architect to draw up the plans and do preliminary drawings. That part of the process would be done outside of what we do. But we can take that information, that data, and plug it back into the reserve study.
I'm just exploring where you fit in the whole picture. That's all.
No, that's fine. No, I understand exactly what you're saying. Where we fit is to take those projected costs on whatever facilities you all end up deciding you need, and plugging that data into that reserve study to get information back to you.
And a little bit along those same lines, I'm doing a very large country club right now that was built in the late 50s and significantly expanded in the 70s. And then it's drifted, and they're asking us to actually make this very nice. So they're really asking us to be kind of the king of this particular facility and helping them to step up the level of the amenities to the association owners' own homes, which they have not done in the past. So, in that vein, we are putting in numbers that say this has gone through a significant amount of deferred maintenance over time, and you need to really freshen this up so you are competitive with your neighbor or whatever standard they want to set. And what we did to be able to do that is actually go through some of these villas, these homeowners' homes, to see the level of detail and sophistication that they had in features, so that when we go to price to update the lobby, we're in line with that level of desire to bring this facility up to.
Now, let me raise one technical issue in terms of reserve studies. The reserve study only includes capital components, meaning you can't have any maintenance operations costs. And it's intended to show what it would cost to replace the items that you currently have. So let's take clubhouse. We can put in the reserve study the replacement of all the components of the clubhouse. We can't put in the reserve study the cost of expanding it, because that doesn't exist yet. So it's not legitimately a capital expenditure. That doesn't mean we can't do what-if scenarios on if you borrow X amount of dollars, how's that going to affect the reserves as a contrast to how much it's going to cost over the years to replace all. So we can do comparisons, but the final reserve study is going to have to show only capital components as the main part of the study.
Let me ask you a couple questions. One, can you subgroup, for instance, our country club, you'll have a series of line items that make that up, HVAC, paving, siding, all of that's broken down then as far as life expectancy, where we are at this point, which then gives us a column when it should normally be replaced. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And then the second question is, you're really going to have to spell out to us in the final proposal where we cross the line of getting updates from, okay? Because we're talking about all kinds of analysis and how many times we come back to you, and And this document's got to be something that we're able to go back and say, hey, you know as well as I do, for instance, a roof hits the 20-year period, and we may say we've got 3 more years in that roof, that we want to move that back. We've got something else we want to up. And where do you guys, in terms of cost for us in keeping going, where do we cross the line of if we've got 27 items one year we need to change, and we want to say we want to change the inflation factor, having to redline and getting an agreement on what the red line should be is very difficult sometimes. Sometimes we play with that a little bit to figure out, where we'd be. How do we just need to know where do we cross the line? We have to calculate, look, it's going to cost X dollars to do this on an annual basis, so we can also have that as a budget line.
The best way to do that is to have the proposal for the reserve study, have it include a couple of meetings and a couple of revisions. So let's say we have 2 meetings and 4 revisions, and after that you go on.
Okay, so if you can spell out what your setup is.
Sure.
And then also define a little bit what's on the clock. I mean, if we decide we're going to make a revision, as an average, what's that going to cost us? $200, $500, $10,000?
If you called me next year and said that you wanted to change the inflation factor from 4.5 to 3, can you send me a revised? About 3 keystrokes and so we're not going to charge. If you went through and said, in a year, we want to change these items, and then we want you to update not only the replacement cost, or not only the remaining useful life, but the replacement cost, and we have to go through the entire report, re-estimate everything, we'll come back to you and say, yeah, we can do that. Here's probably.
But can you also quote us what level, that's a level 3.
That's a level 3.
Can you quote us what that is on a basis as part of the proposal?
We do that for a few associations when they want to have a number like that, and typically what they do is they come to us maybe a month, 2 weeks before they want to see that, and we give them a price at that point. Because they have a better idea of what they're talking about and what they're doing, and that way we can figure out, because everything we do is an hour issue. How many hours is it going to take to inspect this place on site? How many hours is it going to take us to put together a report? So it would be the same type of thing with that. We would have to have a better idea of how many hours. Now,
well, I was thinking on a level 3, though, that's according to your thing here, it's non-site visit, just basically updating the numbers. You should be able to at least give us a range of what a level 3 update would be or not. We're trying to kind of look, if we look at a 5-year thing, we know, hey, it costs us X dollars for a reserve study, and depending on who we go with, if we need outside services, it's going to cost us Y for each of these years. Therefore, we know what our total cost is over a 5-year period. We go and do another reserve, do one in 5 years. What you're giving me is here's what our reserve study is, and I got a series of question marks going forward that, hey, maybe that one's free, maybe that one's, X dollar. Do you understand what I'm saying? We got to have something that at least gives us a range of what it runs.
Sure, and we certainly can provide that. We don't know how many items you're going to have in your reserve study. Intuitively, I think it's a lot. So we'd have to go back and look and say, if we were going to update the replacement costs and the remaining useful life of all these items, once we have the reserve study done, we know exactly what it is. Going into the reserve study, we could put in there as part of the proposal, here's what we think the level 3 update would be.
Based on 2,000 line items, okay, 2,000 assets, okay, because right now we're running 1,500 or so in our thing. Just as a ballpark idea of what it's, we just need something. I'm not asking you you can qualify it however you want to. When we do an analysis, we're kind of left with a blank there for that when we're comparing apples to apples among the 3 bidders.
I think the best thing I can say about that is the one client that I'm particularly talking about in Florida, their update is about 10% of their reserve study. That's at the upper end of what it usually is. Now, if they come back and tell us this year we only want to do it hourly, it can be considerably less.
Right. Okay.
But as a kind of a rule of thumb,
yeah.
10% about what a level
kind of what I was looking for. That's a kind of comparison to the others. So.
Okay. Now, I'm going to butt in a little bit if you don't mind. Jerry had asked me to hit on a couple of things that are coming in our proposal, just to make sure that we say these things and that he understands. Our proposal right now is just for the reserve study, but we have two experts that we bring in for golf courses and underwater inspections, and they would be separate contracts should you decide to use them. If you want to have an underwater inspection of your bulkheads and piers, Tom Zerilli, we worked with him and his former company, which was Guthrie Diving, and he would come and look at things. That one's probably a little more difficult to pin down because it matters how detailed we look at it. If we do pick penetrations and core samples of pilings and hands-on inspection of all 9 miles of bulkheads, it's going to be probably in the $10,000 to $12,000 range. If he's doing a spot check of things and is only out there a day or two, we're probably more in the $3,000, $5,000, $6,000. The other one is much easier. Mike Vogt is an expert in golf courses that we've used on quite a few jobs. And 18-hole golf course is kind of a standard package. So his expert look at the thing at your facilities would probably be in the, let's say, $3,000 to $4,000 range, should you decide to use that. If you want me to just go ahead and get proposals for these and just pop them in there so that you've got them, I do need some time for that. So I would need to know rather quickly whether we are including those add-on supplemental reports to this package that you want to have, I believe, next Thursday. So get to Jerry and have him pop me an email. We'll do that.
Now we can look at the golf course and work with your golf superintendent and come up with numbers on what's costing each year to do this or that or whatever, as long as it's a capital expenditure, not maintenance. But what this individual does, he's a PGA certified inspector. He comes out and he'll give you a report based on the actual condition that needs to be done to bring it up to current standards. So it's a much more detailed inspection.
All right, we'll get back to you on that. Now, I think Jerry gave you a copy of this RFP, which basically is just what we did before, kind of updated based on all of the input we got from all three. Monday, we'll probably send you a quick email of anything that came up in here that remains a question. A little bit like we talked about, level 3 plus or minus 10% is kind of an average there.
And I'll clarify.
Yeah.
And please get a hold of Jim. Like I said, I'm in the throes of a very big project myself. You'll probably,
So we have a couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of what information you can give us that will make the process a little bit faster and a little less expensive. The roads. You've got a massive amount of roads. Are all of them part of the community, or are they the local municipality? Have you had any inspections done on
We have road plan involved. We can share the road plan.
and that gives accurate quantities and all that sort of thing? What about the ponds, water features around? I know some of them belong to the golf course, some belong to the city. They're all yours? In terms of the other facilities, do you have inventories of vehicles, maintenance equipment, computers, furniture, that sort of thing?
We do. We have something that is similar to this kind of a breakdown, which is not probably as detailed as you give us back, but gives you basically a breakdown of all the components to the extent that we have. And our book that, our original cost back. I mean, that's as good as the year that it was. So we would give you all of that, and obviously any of the previous reserve studies that we've had done, which various movements and everything else like that. So, how many people would you anticipate? Would you anticipate one person out here kind of going through, or 2 or 3 to go through the facility, given the size?
What we would have is one person that's the lead on the research study, probably two other individuals. It depends on whether you all want to have a more formal inspection of bulkheads and piers on the water, the hardscape that you have associated with the water. But we'd have one person that would be doing the buildings, one person would be doing the grounds, and then one person would probably be doing the water, the seascape. What else can I answer?
Another thing I'd like to mention, and this came up briefly in one of the questions, is oftentimes in a large facility like this, you've got different revenue streams and different packages that develop. So, for instance, the golf course often is its own analysis. Okay, oftentimes the roads and bridges and other features that everybody uses is what we would call like a master association. So you're not having all the stuff locked in as one giant analysis, but rather some pieces that make sense. Your marinas may be different. We don't need to know that at this point, but just know that when if you decide to use Miller Dodson, talk to the analyst about that, think about that, because that makes it easier to I guess think about the revenue streams that pay for those particular items that may be different. Okay, so that's something to have in mind. That it's not going to necessarily be one gigantic report, with 2,000 items in it. It might be three reports with 2,000 items each. I don't know.
So you were talking about grouping them together.
Yeah.
And how these things are organized. But typically, we do something where you've got all the site features, then all the roads, and then all the recreation. So all of those things will be broken down.
Thanks.
We're good?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank
you for coming.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Very useful.
Thank you. Okay, Jerry. Stop.
Do anything.